I don't want to start by discussing Boris Johnson's story. I want to start with Safia Nagar's story, a 20-year-old woman who lost her father to COVID last year. Safia's dad, Dr. Zagari Nagar, was a doctor who worked in the National Health Service for nearly 40 years. Safia and her brother moved home before Boris Johnson announced the Christmas lockdown in 2020. After a trip to the supermarket, they contracted COVID-19. They tried to isolate, but their dad caught the virus too. He was okay for the first week, but a few nights later, Dr. Zagari woke up unable to breathe. The next day, he began to cough up blood, and he was taken to hospital. He was in intensive care for 2 weeks. During that time, Safia and her family were unable to visit their father. They were unable to visit their father because of the laws created by Boris Johnson. And on the 7th of February, Dr. Zagari died alone. Alone. Without his family, without his friends, without anyone. Alone. I felt so guilty that I couldn't be there, Safia said. I cannot imagine the pain that she felt. For following the laws, her Prime Minister forced her to follow. But the guilt is what so many of us felt for making sacrifices during the pandemic over the last 2 years. Guilt for not visiting elderly or dying relatives. Guilt for not going to funerals. Guilt for going or not being able to go to weddings. Guilt for not seeing the birth of their own children. It breaks my heart and your heart, because the only people who should be feeling guilt are our so-called leaders, who are refusing to take responsibility for their crimes. The guilty men are the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. They've dishonoured the sacrifice that the British public made on their behalf. They've dishonoured their office. They've dishonoured their country. On the 15th of May 2020, the rule stated that you could only meet one person outdoors while exercising. But Boris Johnson and his staff drank wine, ate cheese in a Downing Street party. They were in the Downing Street garden. That day, 411 people in the UK died from COVID-19. On the 20th of May, Boris Johnson and his wife attended a party in the number 10 garden. That day, 328 people died. On the 13th of November, Downing Street staff members attended a party with Carrie Johnson in the flat where she and the Prime Minister lived. 8 days earlier, the Prime Minister had announced a new lockdown in England banning indoor gatherings. That day, 376 people died. On the 15th of December 2020, the Prime Minister took part in a party quiz in the number 10 library. A week earlier, London was placed under restrictions banning 2 or more people from meeting indoors. That day, 506 people died. On the 16th of April 2021, 2 parties were held at number 10 the night before Prince Philip's funeral. Socialising indoors with people from other households was banned. The Queen had to mourn her husband alone. By that point, 130,000 people had died from the COVID-19 pandemic in the United Kingdom. It's sickening. The leaders of our country getting drunk at parties in their state-funded homes after making laws that meant families like Sophia's were unable to visit relatives that they would never see again. People lay on their deathbeds. Their hands remained untouched by their loved ones. As we look back today, it's absolutely crystal clear that we have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who not only broke the law, but they lied again and again about attending multiple illegal parties. 170,000 people dying on their watch. When the revelations first appeared and the Prime Minister began to feel the heat, I remember Keir Starmer quizzing him at the dispatch box countless times, giving him the opportunity to come clean. But instead of being frank with the British people, Boris Johnson dodged and ducked, being so dishonest, lying frankly through his teeth. At first he said he didn't know that there were parties. Then he said he wasn't at any parties. Then he said that, yes, there were parties, but he didn't realise that they were parties. Now he's been fined by the police for hosting multiple parties. And he says it did not occur to him that he broke the law. Let me repeat that. He says it didn't occur to him. Well, it occurred to everybody else listening to this show. It occurred to the millions of people who miss funerals, the birth of their children, who stayed at home. And before I became a politician, I was a lawyer. It doesn't take a law degree to know that ignorance is not a defence for breaking the law. So there's a simple question. Should he now resign? And frankly, I cannot believe, after lying to Parliament, after breaking the ministerial code, after suffering a criminal sanction, that this is still up for debate. He broke the ministerial code. He lied to Parliament. He became the first Prime Minister to break the law in office. Some Conservative MPs are saying that you cannot change leader during a crisis. But the Prime Minister's a great student of history. Well, let's give him a history lesson. In 1940, Neville Chamberlain was replaced by Winston Churchill the day Hitler invaded Western Europe. Lord George replaced Herbert Asquith weeks after the Somme. George Greville replaced Pitt the Younger weeks after Napoleon's triumph at Austerlitz. And there is no time more important, frankly, than to replace a feckless leader during a crisis. And if this is about Ukraine, if this is about leadership during Putin's illegal war, why did the Prime Minister allegedly cancel plans to bring back Parliament today because of a potential chemical weapons use in Mariupol? We need a Prime Minister who can do everything necessary to support Ukraine, not one who's hiding from Parliament to save his own skin. This is also a simple question of fairness. As a backbencher, I published the Lammy review looking at how our justice system unfairly affects ethnic minorities. As Shadow Secretary of State for Justice, I was committed to making the justice system work for all Britons. My constituent was fined £2,200 for going out in lockdown without a reasonable excuse last month. If there's any justice in this country, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, the people who made the laws and lied about breaking them, would at least lose their jobs and taxpayer-funded homes.